France, summer 1944. The air still hums with the echoes of 1,000 distant guns, the roads are clogged with columns of American vehicles, and every hedgerow hides the memory of battle. It is a time of liberation, triumph, and vengeance, a time when good and evil are supposed to be painted in black and white. But as the dust settles and the Allies push the Nazis ever farther east, not every story fits the scripts of easy heroism or simple justice. On the outskirts of a battered hamlet in Normandy, a battered platoon of American infantrymen comes face to face with a group of Waffen SS soldiers, men feared and, by some, hated above all others. These SS prisoners are young but infamous, notorious for the atrocities they'd unleashed in France just days before. Word of massacres like Oradour-sur-Glane and the Malmedy killings spread quickly among Allied ranks, stoking rage and a thirst for revenge among soldiers who'd lost friends at their hands. The code of war and raw fury whisper the same solution: take no prisoners. Yet in this small corner of France, a different decision is made, one that would haunt, challenge, and ultimately define the Americans who made it. Instead of violence, they choose mercy. Instead of retribution, restraint. What compels men burdened with grief and anger to spare the lives of those branded as monsters? This is the true story of U.S. soldiers who, when given a choice, laid down their vengeance, and what it cost them and the world in the days that followed. The sun was descending behind the hedgerows of Normandy, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold as the American infantry platoon spread out, eyes alert. It was July 27, 1944, less than 2 months since the D-Day landings, and the countryside still felt haunted by the ghosts of the invasion. Lieutenant Bill Morgan, just 24 but already aged by countless firefights, led his men through a landscape at once beautiful and scarred, orchard trees splintered by shells, farmhouses riddled with bullet holes, muddy ditches where bodies had lain for days. Morgan's platoon was exhausted. In the previous week alone, they'd weathered 2 ambushes, a 3-day rainstorm, lost their company's radio man to sniper fire, and endured a night pinned down by MG-42s that never seemed to run out of ammunition. But the worst wasn't just the fighting, it was the things they'd heard. All up and down the line, word was spreading. SS men were never to be trusted. Stories of massacres, especially at places like Oradour-sur-Glane, had reached every foxhole. Some claimed SS units shot American prisoners without warning. Others swore that anyone found with SS insignia was a dead man walking. Still, Morgan tried to keep his men focused. Official orders had not, to his knowledge, changed. The Geneva Convention still applied, and prisoners unjustly shot were not only a moral stain, but a tactical disaster. Intelligence depended on questioning POWs, and the brass certainly wanted information. But unofficial orders, rumors, and quiet advice passed among the men told a different story. Some officers made it understood, without ever saying the words directly, "Don't bother bringing SS men back." On this evening, Morgan's squad had been rotated up front with the task of sweeping a small hamlet recently pounded by artillery. Civilians, those who hadn't fled, kept their shutters closed and heads down. The Americans moved carefully, searching for snipers or holdout machine gun nests. Then, behind a stone barn, Private Jenkins heard the whimper of voices, German, young, and scared. The squad raised their rifles, taking cover as Morgan crept forward. What he saw surprised him. 5 Waffen SS soldiers, muddy and shaking, their weapons piled at their feet in a gesture of surrender. Morgan hesitated. The men wore the black and silver runes that made most Allies see red, a chilling reminder of Hitler's most fanatical troops. Some looked barely older than Jenkins. One was bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his thigh. The moment seemed to stretch. Sergeant Taylor, a hard-edged orchard worker from Iowa, flicked his safety off and spat on the ground. "SS, sir, we know what they do. We heard plenty after what happened in the last town," he muttered. The rest of the squad murmured agreement. For a heartbeat, the platoon's code was tested. Rage, justice, and the urge for vengeance all danced in the air. Morgan glanced at the Germans, who watched with wide, frantic eyes, clearly expecting the worst. And then, maybe it was fatigue, or faith, or a stubborn belief in what made an American soldier different, Morgan made his decision. "Put down your weapons. Hands up. We do things by the book here." His voice was louder than he felt. With barely a nod to Taylor, he signaled Jenkins to collect the surrendered weapons and methodically pat down each SS man for hidden sidearms. Taylor scowled but complied, mumbling that it was a waste of good energy. The platoon secured the prisoners, patched the wounded soldier's leg with a bandage, and radioed for transport. Morgan made himself look each German in the eyes. "We aren't you," he said, in rough German learned by trading jokes with his grandmother. "You expect us to shoot you, but that's not how we fight." The SS men nodded, some grateful, others just numb. As night crept in, the platoon slumped by the barn, keeping watch until a jeep loaded with MPs arrived, its headlights slicing through the dusk. In the days that followed, Morgan's squad debated the choice. Some held fast to the code. Honor, rules, a faith that mercy wouldn't cost them their souls. Others, still angry, argued that sparing men capable of terrible crimes was a sign of weakness. But the men who made the decision to spare, not shoot, would carry the memory with them for the rest of their lives, a decision seldom celebrated but never forgotten. Morgan's decision set his platoon on a path not every American unit would choose. As dusk fell and word spread along the line, other soldiers gathered in small groups, voices low, tempers high. The story of SS atrocities, Malmedy, Oradour-sur-Glane, rumors of killings across Normandy, burned in their memories and echoed in the anger in their guts. For some, sparing SS prisoners felt like betrayal, a kindness denied to their own fallen friends. Sergeant Taylor grumbled as he cleaned the mud from his rifle. "Those SS bastards would have shot us all, sir. Everybody knows it. Hell, some units don't bring these men back at all." Jenkins nodded, staring at the barn's stone wall as if looking for answers. "We're supposed to fight by the rules," he said quietly, "but nobody told the SS about rules." That night the men heard sporadic gunfire from nearby sectors. The rumors swirled. Another SS team wiped out. Some didn't even make it to POW cages. Morgan listened, silent, knowing full well what those sounds meant. He couldn't shake the sense of conflict in his own chest. Pride in discipline, rage at atrocity, fear for his reputation among his men. Next morning, the platoon received fresh orders. Move east. Sweep the next farmhouse. The SS prisoners had been handed off to military police, their fate uncertain. Some of Morgan's men wondered aloud what would happen if the POWs ended up with a company that didn't see things the same way. Morgan cut them short, eyes hard. "What we do is on us. I'm not them." As they advanced through foggy fields, the platoon encountered French civilians emerging from hiding. Barely a word was exchanged, but the looks Morgan got, a mix of gratitude and grief, made the cost of war personal. An old woman handed Jenkins a loaf of bread. "Merci," she said, weeping. Later that day, 2 more Germans, ordinary Wehrmacht soldiers this time, tried to surrender. A young American private, shaken by all he'd witnessed, raised his rifle but couldn't pull the trigger. Instead, he shepherded the men to Company HQ, earning a nod from Morgan and a chorus of sighs from older GIs. By midday, the platoon stumbled on the aftermath of a darker choice. Another squad had fought through the night and captured a group of SS men. When Morgan arrived, he found a grim scene. The Germans, unarmed and terrified, were lined up against a wall. Shots rang out before Morgan could intervene. By the time he reached them, 3 were dead. The American squad leader didn't meet his eyes. In the days that followed, talk of revenge and mercy consumed the campfires. Some saw Morgan as a man with a spine. Others whispered that he lacked anger, that he'd gone soft. Still, none forgot the difference between vengeance and discipline, the razor edge dividing war from madness. Morgan spent sleepless nights wondering whether he'd done enough. He recorded his doubts in a battered notebook, pages black with rain and guilt. If you stare into the abyss long enough, do you become it? Or does the abyss blink first, if you hold your ground? We came here to liberate, not to descend. As the Allied advance continued, Morgan's platoon became known, unofficially, as the Gentleman. It was both a jest and a mark of respect. Some commanders, thirsting for intelligence, praised their restraint. Others, bitter and battle-worn, warned them not to get too comfortable. Don't forget what the enemy did. Don't forget why we fight. By August, the small choices made in Normandy had woven themselves into the larger tapestry of the war. Morgan knew men who never recovered from what they'd seen and what they'd done. He saw discipline as a shield, protecting his platoon not just from bullets, but from the kind of hatred that could destroy their souls long after victory was won. As the sun rose over the battered fields of Normandy, whispers of the previous night's decisions spread from platoon to platoon like wildfire. News had broken of Morgan's squad sparing Waffen SS prisoners, men branded by most as monsters, the architects of horror known from infamous events such as the Normandy massacre. The battlefield was no place for sympathy, and yet here, in a small corner of the war, American GIs made a choice few dared to voice aloud. Sergeant Taylor, now gritting his teeth, met an officer's gaze. "They say those SS men killed our boys near Normandy. Some of us think mercy's for the weak." Lieutenant Morgan's eyes hardened. "We fight to save lives, not take them in cold blood. That's what sets us apart." The capture of SS soldiers was a fraught reality. These troops were notorious for their fanaticism, fierce loyalty to Nazi ideology, and harsh treatment of prisoners. Allied soldiers had heard too many whispered warnings, no quarter given. But Morgan's men hadn't delivered the grim fate many expected. Instead, they held their prisoners with discipline, treating even these feared enemies as men under the laws of war. The troops understood this could draw criticism, even charges of soft-heartedness in a brutal war. But they knew better. Mercy was a weapon as strong as any rifle. By sparing these men, they preserved the humanity that the Nazis sought to extinguish. Morgan recalled a moment with one young SS soldier named Klaus, no older than his own brother. Klaus was shaken, eyes wide with terror, a stark contrast to the cold image his uniform demanded. Through halting translations and shared struggles, Morgan saw beyond the insignia, a frightened young man trapped in the machinery of war. Days passed, and the prisoners were transported to a secure holding area. Guards reported few incidents. The SS soldiers, disarmed and demoralized, offered little resistance. The American soldiers' restraint had not only spared lives, but prevented needless bloodshed and chaos during an already brutal advance. Behind the front lines, military intelligence viewed these moments with mixed feelings. Some commanders worried about security risks, fearing these prisoners would feign cooperation. Others praised the discipline embodied by Morgan's company. The Allies' ultimate mission, to defeat Nazism, was rooted in upholding the very principles of law and decency they fought to protect. Yet the soldiers on the ground often bore the heaviest burdens. Moments of mercy clashed with the memories of comrades lost to cruelty. The dichotomy was a source of inner turmoil, reflected in letters home and quiet conversations around campfires. Morgan wrote in his journal, "War requires strength, but not at the cost of our souls. We will win not by becoming monsters, but by proving there is still light in the darkest places." This resolve would define him and his men for the rest of their service, and in the years that followed, became a testament echoed by veterans across a generation. The choice to spare had repercussions beyond the battlefield. It was a seed planted toward reconciliation, individual dignity, and the rebuilding of a shattered world. The battle for Normandy raged on, and the American soldiers who had chosen mercy met its brutal realities every day. But it was these gritty moments of humanity amid conflict that revealed the true heart of their mission. The story of sparing captured SS troops had spread beyond Morgan's platoon, stirring debates, reflections, and sometimes anger, but also inspiring silent pride. Private Jenkins, once hesitant, now carried the weight of his choice with solemn respect. During a lull in the fighting, he found himself face to face with one of the spared SS soldiers, a young man named Klaus. Forced into combat by circumstances beyond his control, Klaus shared fractured stories of forced conscription and lost hopes, stories Jenkins never expected to hear from an enemy. With translators scarce, words were simple, but understanding was profound. Jenkins often thought of Klaus as the enemy no longer, but a fellow human survivor caught in war's machinery. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Morgan faced pressure from higher command. A visiting officer questioned the wisdom of showing leniency toward men responsible for atrocities, warning of the risks to morale and security. Morgan defended his decision firmly. "We fight differently. Victory without honor is defeat. Mercy is not weakness," he insisted. His words echoed the values taught since basic training, but were rarely tested so fiercely in the chaos of battle. Meanwhile, the Germans left alive wrestled with their own conflicted feelings. Some harbored bitterness toward their captors, others a fragile gratitude. One particular SS corporal, Friedrich, later recounted in an interview decades after the war how the humane treatment he received changed his perception of Americans from enemies to honorable men. The American Medical Corps played a critical role. Wounded SS prisoners received care alongside Allied soldiers. Nurses and medics, many just teenagers themselves, worked tirelessly without regard for badges or stripes. Their dedication underscored the ethical principles that guided the best of the Allied forces. As Morgan's platoon moved forward, they encountered devastated towns and fields scarred by shell fire. Civilians, French, Belgian, and beyond, emerged from hiding, their eyes reflecting both hope and horror. The kindness shown to prisoners contrasted sharply with the widespread suffering around them, reminding the soldiers of their true mission. Late one evening, gathered around a flickering campfire, Morgan shared a letter from home, written by his mother. It spoke of pride in his bravery, not just in battle, but in compassion. The men were reminded that the war was not just about guns and territory, but about preserving the humanity they fought to defend. And so, in the swirl of gunfire and mud, moments like their choice to spare the SS reinforced a fragile bond between ideals and reality. They were not just soldiers, they were custodians of a higher law. As Morgan's platoon moved deeper into the war's grinding machinery, a quieter battle began. A struggle to hold on to the very values and humanity that had shaped them before boots ever touched French soil. News was spreading of the sometimes harsh realities faced by German prisoners of war, including those in American custody. While frontline mercies had saved lives, the broader system faced pressure and scrutiny. Most German POWs captured by the Americans were eventually shipped to sprawling camps in the United States, over 400,000 in total. These camps, unlike the brutal confines many of the prisoners had left behind, were known for surprisingly humane conditions, ample food, medical care exceeding many frontline hospitals in Europe, and freedoms seldom expected during wartime captivity. Many prisoners worked on farms and factories, earned wages, and developed uneasy, tentative friendships with American guards and civilians. But the tensions ran deep beneath the surface. News of atrocities such as the Normandy massacre still churned soldiers' emotions. Some locals raised protests against the presence of enemy prisoners nearby. Labor unions challenged the use of POWs to fill war-depleted agricultural jobs, while some American soldiers wrestled privately with resentment and memory. No prisoner was simply a uniform or an enemy. They were men, many young and scared, struggling to survive a war that threatened to swallow everything. Morgan received letters from families back home, full of pride yet tinged with concern. Were they too lenient? Was their discipline as strong as their enemies' ferocity? His answer could only be personal conviction. Mercy, justice, and strength were not mutually exclusive. In quiet moments, he reflected on the transformation these prisoners underwent, not just physically, but ideologically. The American military's re-education efforts aimed to turn former Nazis into Democrats, helping prepare Germany for a peaceful post-war future. Many prisoners, surprised by American kindness and freedoms, found their unwavering belief in Nazi doctrine shaken. Morgan knew that how prisoners were treated today shaped the memory and choices of the soldiers who would soon return home. Mercy meant more than forgiveness. It was an investment in peace. Yet in the middle of it all was the raw truth of battle, loss, pain, fury, and the years of struggle ahead. It was a fragile hope that someday the men they spared, especially the SS whom many feared most, would become part of a world not consumed by hate. As the war entered its final months, the spared SS prisoners and countless other German POWs began a new chapter far from the front lines. More than 400,000 were transported to the United States, Dozens of camps established across the country to house this unexpected and massive population of former enemies. Morgan's men, who had taken the difficult choice to spare lives on the battlefield, watched as these men, once feared and hated, were now confined within barbed wire enclosures, but treated with surprising humanity. The prisoners ate well, received medical care, and were sometimes even allowed freedoms unheard of on battlefields. They worked on farms and factories, often alongside American civilians, sowing seeds for both rebuilding and reconciliation. This period was complex. While most Americans were proud of their country's treatment of POWs, tensions simmered beneath the surface. War memories ran deep. Families who had lost sons, neighbors suspicious of German prisoners, and soldiers struggling with their own trauma. In some camps, former SS prisoners reluctantly took on administrative roles under careful watch, blurring lines of authority and trust. Morgan reflected often on the paradox. By choosing mercy, his platoon had not only saved lives, but contributed to laying the foundations for peace between former foes. He recalled the letters from veterans who later spoke of the lasting impact on their beliefs, that war was not merely about victory, but protecting the principles of decency that would allow humanity to endure. The journey from Normandy's trenches to POW camps thousands of miles away was the most unexpected of odysseys, a passage through fear, judgment, mercy, and ultimately, a fragile hope for a better tomorrow. As the guns fell silent and peace finally returned to Europe, the story of those American soldiers who chose mercy over vengeance became a testament to courage beyond the battlefield. Their decision to spare captured SS troops was not the easy choice. It went against the tide of fury and fear that war breeds. Yet it was a choice rooted in the belief that the values they fought for demanded better than hatred. Mercy was their silent victory. These men carried their compassion forward beyond Normandy, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, humanity can shine through. Their legacy lives not just in history books, but in the hearts of those who believe peace is won through courage and kindness, not just guns. If this story of honor amid chaos moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more untold tales from war's shadows. Join our community dedicated to uncovering history's human stories, where the overlooked heroes and forgotten moments come alive. Don't miss our next video diving deep into the letters, diaries, and acts of bravery that shaped our world. Thank you for watching.